The Pulse School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by BASF.
I'm Amber Bell, and this is Real Agriculture here today for an episode of Pulse School, and getting the pleasure of speaking with Greg Bartley, who's the Director of Crop Protection and Crop Quality with Pulse Canada today. And we're going to be talking about global pulse markets. So super excited for this episode, Greg. Welcome.
Hey, Amber, nice to join you.
First off, how are they performing right now?
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. So I'd say from a high level, or if we take a look at, from the growing season, our markets were performing pretty good right off the combine. We saw decent movement, especially for yellow peas. But I'd say it's definitely softened, a lot since that harvest finished. If we take a kind of a wide look at things, China and India are our two largest markets for the pulses. Unfortunately for China, there's 100% duty on yellow peas, which essentially closed that market. So we're working very hard to address that issue. And then India, a bit better there. We have about a 11% duty on lentils, which still allows us to serve that market, which is good. And then for yellow peas, it continues to be duty free, and that restriction or those lack of restrictions is out until March 2026. So, from a high level, we saw that decent movement right from the combine, but things have definitely slowed down a bit, due to the supply and prices and things like that.
So what are some of those things that the other countries are actually looking for when it comes to purchasing from Canada?
I think they're looking, whether it's the supply issues and I think price points too. I think there's a large supply of pulses in the global market. Canada's not the only one that has a good crop out there. And I think that's weighing a bit, on the price point. So I'm think, they're looking for decent quality, pulses at a price point, that they're willing to pay for.
When it comes to what other countries are looking for, I know that you do a lot of work with keep it clean priorities. Now, how do those play into the global markets?
Yeah, so the Keep It Clean program is all about making sure that farmers have market-ready crops. So that's where we're trying to distill what our export requirements are and bring it back down to the farm level so, growers can make, good on-farm decisions to make sure that, at the end of the day, our crops remain marketable. So a lot of the main focus, the things that, farmers can have control of at the farm level can be, things like pesticide or contaminant levels or mycotoxins, things like that. So that's a big focus of the Keep It Clean program and kind of what we're trying to deliver through that program.
So, what are some of the things that growers should be double checking with their brokers before they spray or before they're delivering?
Yeah, so obviously we're in the fall now, so spraying's done. But I think say things to look out for at this point, if you did happen to spray some products. We release a product advisory every year, and this kind of highlights the potential, products that we know where there's potential market access concerns. So from a pulse perspective, there's two or three that I think are worth highlighting. The first one is glufosinate ammonium as a desiccant. It's not allowed as a desiccant. We don't have MRLs in any of our export markets, and extremely important not to use that product. So for some reason that product was applied, you're going to face marketing restrictions, and we need to make sure that stays out of the supply chain. A second thing, new for this year, it's flunicimid, or that's the active ingredient for the insecticide product carbine, for aphid controlled lentils. We're communicating potential market access issues on green lentils into the European Union, and this is more just around uncertainty with the MRL there. So again, if it was applied this growing season, I think it's just need to make sure that when you're talking to your grain buyer, if that grain buyer is serving the EU market, you may run into a situation where they may not accept your product.
Mm.
There's other markets, where that emerald there isn't an emerald concern with that product. So, there's potentially you just need to go find a different buyer. But it's super important, to have that conversation with the grain buyer if you did use that product to make sure that we're not, contributing to that emerald certainty in the EU. And then finally, glyphosate. We talk about glyphosate every year, and it's just making sure that, the product is applied correctly. So while there's could be potential market restrictions in terms of, commercial requirements, things like that. At the end of the day, if you use the product, according to label, you correctly got that application timing correct, and you have that conversation with the grain buyer, I don't think you'd have too many problems, marketing that grain with your exporter if you have that conversation early on.
Are there any new messaging priorities when it comes to keep it clean this year?
We try and keep when we strip down the messaging to keep it clean, it may seem high level, but I think that's by intent. again, trying to make sure that we have those market ready crops. When you strip it down to things of, using only, acceptable pesticides only, registered products, you don't cause market, trade concerns, always read and follow the label, making sure that we're using the products, correctly, applying them correctly for application rate, timing, pre-harvest interval. That message doesn't change from year to year. It's a strong foundation. When you get into things like plant diseases, there could be market access things jump up in export markets. So you may see some tweaking in messaging throughout the growing season or different campaign years. I think the mycotoxins is one that's, we're seeing a bit more focus on in our export markets. So while there's nothing specific from a pulse perspective in that messaging, a lot of it relates to fusarium in wheat. I think there's going to be a greater attention, moving forward and bringing focus to mycotoxins, and that relates to proper storage as well. And then,
Right.
deliver what you declare. It's a simple message, but it's just really understanding what those producer declarations are, and that you are meeting the requirements of the declaration. So it may seem like we're saying the same thing every year, but that's by intent. It's trying to keep it simple. The messages, apply year to year. That remains the focus.
Right. Let's talk about pulse acres in general. Are we seeing shifts towards more pulse acres across Canada?
Yeah, if you look at the acres this year compared to last year, we're fairly steady, if anything, up a bit. Moving forward, I'd say pulses are definitely a strong component of the crop rotation. I don't expect them to change, drastically one way or the other. But if we're gonna, forecast out to next year, I'm not going to speculate on that. I think
No.
there's too many variables out there. I don't think anyone has a good understanding of market trends right now of which way things could go one way or the other. It's definitely a challenging situation. So I'm hopeful they remain stable. I think they're a strong part of crop rotations. But as far as ex- looking at acreage for next year, I don't have the answers.
That is perfectly fair. And where do you see the strongest growth in pulse types? Or where have
Strongest
you
growth
seen?
in pulse types. Yeah. No, I see, like, I think our peas and lentils, obviously those are the main crops we grow, here in Western Canada. Chickpeas, there's been some strong growth. But again, it comes down to global supplies. So we'll see, what the market trends are there for next year. I say the most interesting one that we hear about, and there's a lot of work on, is the smaller acreage crops, something like lupins or faba beans. Faba beans, we just got access to Mexico. So that's a new market opportunity, which could drive some growth there. And then lupins, there's lots of interest from a lupin standpoint in some of our export markets and the processors, high protein. So it's an exciting crop to see where it can go in the years to come. Yeah, there's definitely some growth potentials with some of those crops.
That is very exciting. And if you had one piece of advice to give to pulse producers planning for the 2026 crop year, what would it be?
Yeah, I'd say, strip it down, stick with your plan. It's a challenging time out there right now, so work closely with your advisors. And then obviously, if you're looking for any help, in terms of, market access restrictions and things like that, national commodity associations, we're a resource. You can lean on us, and obviously, we're going to try and keep our messaging with it, keep it clean, up to date, so that you're well aware of any of those potential market access restrictions related to pest control products or mycotoxins or plant disease, things like that. So check in often, sign up for the newsletter, and we're happy to provide that information on behalf of the industry.
That's terrific. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us, Greg. And that was Greg Bartley on Real Agriculture.